What got you there with Sean DeLaney? What got you there with got you?
If I study leaders who are absolutely exceptional at building relationships, here's something that many of them do that other people don't do. And if on the face of that, you find that powerful, worth emulating, worth doing yourself, then I think it's worth me sharing it with you.
Dr. Randall Stutman is a leadership scientist dedicated to exploring the behaviors and routines of extraordinary leaders. Labeled by Goldman Sachs as the most experienced advisor and executive coach on Wall Street, he has served as a principal advisor to more than 2,000 senior executives, including 400 CEOs. His work as an advisor and speaker has taken him to the White House, West Point, the Olympics, and the Harvard Business School. With a fierce devotion to understanding what makes leaders great, he is the founder of the Admired Leadership Institute, which is dedicated to uncovering and teaching the uncommon behavioral routines of the world's best leaders. Dr. Stutman promotes the idea that exceptional leaders engage in the same routines in all aspects of their lives, including in the family, in the office, with friends and colleagues, and with clients. If you're at all interested in becoming a better leader, and let's face it, all of us are leaders, then you will definitely enjoy this episode.
Randall, welcome to What Got You There. How are you doing today?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing really well. This is a fun one for me. I've had the opportunity to take your Admired Leadership course, and it was one of the most profound paradigm shifts I had around leadership. So this is one of those conversations where I get to learn a ton. I'm hoping the listeners can as well. One of the questions I've started with around 100 plus guests so far is around their routines and routines throughout the day, just to set them up for success. And you're someone who's studied so much around this space. I would love to know what type of routines you have throughout your day you found the most success with.
Yeah, I'm not sure I'm going to be all that interesting about routines. You know, I have a couple of things that I do in particular that I've learned from other leaders. The first thing that I do is I don't start the day processing information or responding to it. So the cadence, once you get into it, when you start processing right away, is you stay there. You stay in that rhythm. And so I make it a habit, not to allow my phone anywhere near me when I sleep, and then it's not there when I wake up. So I go about my morning for a little while, not more than about 30 minutes or so, before I ever engage emails or texts or anything else. And so that kind of creates, and I start on productivity. I start being productive all the way from the beginning. So I guess that's a routine. What else do I do? At the end of the day, if I've actually listened to things or read things, which is most days, or I've engaged other people in some way and I've taken notes, I distill those notes down to key insights. And then I usually place those insights someplace in one of my journals. And some days I don't have any insights. It doesn't mean I don't have notes, but that's just the way it goes. Other days it takes me a little bit of time to be able to distill those and put those in the right places and so forth, so I can review them later. Those would probably be the only really two routines that I probably would say I'm religious about. After that, the day is what the day is. I try to, throughout the day, create enough white space so I can actually move from conversation to conversation, because that's what I'm doing most days, is having conversations. It's not easy to make the transitions quickly enough, fast enough, in order to really focus on the next conversation. Making fast transitions is really important, at least in my view. So I guess another thing that I do is I kind of try to find segues or transition points, so I don't move exactly from one conversation to another conversation, at least instantaneously. And as much of that white space that I can create, that's a good thing. And I try to do that fairly purposefully all day long. I think that's where I am. I don't think I have any other routines.
No, there's plenty to hit on here. I'd love to jump into your distillation of knowledge, and we're hoping we can walk away from this conversation with some wisdom. And I know that's a focus for you, really distilling things down to wisdom. What is that actual process? You mentioned you're coming across things throughout the day. Is that going just in one specific journal or notebook? How do you organize that?
So it's a behavior that we actually talk about in admired leadership around making personal change, and it's one that's really changes a lot of things for people, and it certainly changed me a long time ago when I first uncovered it in a variety of leaders, and I thought, why don't I do this? And I started doing it, and it's just been amazing. So the idea goes like this. So first of all, if you're somebody that's a learning machine, like a lot of us want to be and aspire to be, you're constantly gathering information, data. You're trying to gather new knowledge all day long. You're reading things, you're listening to podcasts, you're talking to people, you're hearing a quote, all those things. And if you're like me, if you go to some presentation, you take 8 pages of notes. I mean, it's not like somebody says only one smart thing. They say lots of smart things. And so you're writing all those things down. The problem is what most people do is they collect all those notes and they have no ability to use any of that knowledge or wisdom at all, because all those notes do is collect either some dust in a file cabinet or in a folder, or they just simply stay buried and hidden inside your phone or inside your laptop. So the key is, first of all, to understand that collecting information is just the first step. And if you're good and you spend a lot of time doing it, and I have a lot of colleagues that are really good at taking better notes than I do, you have a lot of it all day long, every day. But then the next step is to be able to distill it down to make it and look and say, what are the real insights? What's the wisdom here? Is there any? Is there anything I want to really keep? And what is it? And can I re-articulate it in a way where I can remember it? And so now you're engaged in the distilling process, where you're taking 8 pages, 10 pages, 20 pages of notes and scribbles, and you're moving it to not many things, 2, 3, 4 sentences in many cases. It's rare that I would actually distill something and grab a whole page of something. That would be really unusual. I want the process to create a kernel of what's the insight, what's the thing that I want to eventually remember. And then initially, the way that I started is you put it in one spot, but then what you realize is that's, first of all, that journal grows pretty fast unless you're not an active learner. But second, then it doesn't enable you to access the things that you really want, because you got to go searching for them. So now, after several decades of doing this, I have about 36 different journals where if I get a nugget around, how people give feedback, then it goes into my feedback journal. If I get a nugget around some just really interesting wordage, diction, just some language that I really think, a metaphor that I think is cool, it goes into my language journal, and so forth and so on. Stories, I collect stories that I think are really powerful. So now all of this is just the preamble to what really matters. And that is when you are able to, with some level of consistency, review those insights. And so I try to go through all of my journals once a month, and I just simply scan them and just run down all those insights. Now, one of the first things you'll do is you'll occasionally run into something that you've written down as an insight recently, and you'll go, why did I think that was interesting? Like, what was I thinking there? And so you'll cull that out. You'll simply scratch it out, cross it out in some way. No reason to review that anymore. Whatever you were thinking, it didn't hold up. But the rest of it, you're making it available to yourself. So now wisdom is only wisdom if, in fact, you can act on it. And so now what you're doing by the review process is you're making it available for what's in your mind to be able to actually act on this stuff. And so you can remember those stories. You can instantly engage in those behaviors. You can think about, things, and they come right to you. Most of us actually hear really smart things, and within a short period of time, they're gone. They're not available to us at all. We would have to get lucky to cross them again to go, oh, yes, that was a really important insight. Well, imagine if you, for decades at a time, were always in distilling things down and then reviewing all those things. I mean, people will think you're really smart, by the way, when in fact, all you're really doing is having a very specific process of creating and using wisdom. And so wisdom isn't wisdom, again, unless you can act on it, unless you can actually use it. And the only way that I know that you can actually use it, especially if there's a lot of it, and by the way, there's a lot of wisdom in the world. It's just hard to keep it available to yourself. It's all about the review. The review is what enables you to be able to find it and find its power, and to make it part of your own, and make it so that you've got the ability to act on that wisdom. And so that's a behavior that I teach lots of leaders when I coach and advise. I think so strongly of it, I actually put it in the change module in our Admired Leadership course and kind of explain it, and have a few other people explain how they do it too. And it's just very powerful. In fact, I know, Sean, that you're like this. I have quite a few colleagues that are like this. I have many clients that are like this, and there's just we're learning junkies. We want to get wiser. We think the whole idea here is not to make the same mistakes over and over again, but to actually do things as effectively and as efficiently as we possibly can, and to actually act smartly. And so the only way you can pull that off is to be a collector of insights, to distill those insights down, to review those insights on a periodic basis. There's no magic in terms of how it gets structured. Like, my 36 notebooks will turn into 37 or 38 one day. Not because I'm getting so much, because I'll find an area where I go, I want to access that more quickly. And so I'm going to put all that stuff in there in a particular spot. Now, I still use physical journals, and I like that. I like the rewriting process that requires me to rewrite and distill my ideas down. I don't like things electronically because, at least in that sphere, because it doesn't require me to look at it. These journals sit right behind my desk. When I wake up in the morning and I first go to my desk, I can pull them out any given time. I can always copy them if I'm worried about losing them or something of that nature. But they force me to deal with them because they're physical and I see them all the time. And that's an important part of learning, in my opinion too. So I actually prefer to write things down. I have a few colleagues that have learned this behavior and that are really good at it, and they swear digitally they're able to pull this off. And I don't doubt it, by the way, but it wouldn't work for me. So that's what I do, and it's a pretty important process for me every day, by the way, and at least once a month. Usually, what I don't do is I don't spend an entire day going through all the journals. What I'll do is I'll usually spend some point during the weekend, just about an hour, and I'll go through a handful of the journals and just scan through and peruse the insights. And boy, they're powerful once you grab them and you keep them, and now they're yours and you can use them. And it's easy to regale your friends if you're a good collector of stories and quotes. I'll tell you that. I even have a joke book, and so any joke that I've ever heard that I think is really, really, really funny, it goes in the joke book. And so I literally, if you were asked some of my friends, I could tell jokes for probably a whole day. And they'd go, how could you remember all that? Well, I see them every month, right? I'm scanning them all the time, or I'm culling them out. So that's more than you wanted to know, but that's kind of what I think is really important in terms of wisdom.
Yeah, we ever do a part 2, might be stand up with Randall. But I love this, the collector of wisdom here. And I'm really intrigued by this. I recently shared something yesterday with my team and one of my team members. It was probably about 5 bullet points from an excellent podcast with Danny Meyer, the restaurateur. And he said, what's the one piece of wisdom if I was going to collect this and put this down? So I'm just curious about, how do you share what you've uncovered with the team members?
So before we did our digital course, it was actually an oral tradition. So I would spend about a week's worth of time in a learning kind of environment, a sharing environment, a dialogue environment with any of my colleagues, and we would go through a lot of the behaviors and routines that we've been able to find that we think count as leadership wisdom. And so they would write things down and catalog them and engage in them just like anyone else. And so I believed in that oral tradition very much, out of the Greek philosophy of if you hear it and you're able to write in your own words, it has a bigger impact on you. And so I've never been a big fan of passing out notes or doing note journals or notebooks for other people and cataloging things for other people. But that doesn't mean that that's not powerful. I just have never been a fan of it. So we've always had this oral tradition. Now, of the several hundred behaviors we've been able to find over the years by studying leaders, the kinds of things that make them what we consider admired. Now we do it, and we have a digital course so people can catch up on 100, with some degree of speed, and review them and learn them at their own pace and see examples and exercises and things of that nature. You've gone through it, so you understand how rich that is, and that's only a fraction of what we know. It is probably the most important fraction, however. So we try to pick the things that really matter and can move other people and make them a whole lot better really quickly. But there's lots more than that. And so now they at least get that start, and then the rest of it's an oral tradition again.
I love that. Something to certainly work on with my team. I would love knowing a little bit about the backstory though. And how did you first become interested in leadership?
So it was something I did in graduate school, and I was fascinated first by conflict processes and conflict in large organizations, groups, relationships. Then I got into group dynamics and how groups make decisions, and some of the things that happen during that decision-making process. And that's a really fascinating literature and area. And in the last 2 decades, that area has exploded. And so really, really cool. And from that, I got into influence in organizations and how people influence and advocate in organizations. And slowly, the idea of organizational behavior and leadership became a primary way that I wanted to understand the world and make it better. And so I both, went to school for those things. I started teaching those things, and then I started a set of research projects around leadership. And the literature is not that old, but it's full of ideas, of theories and frameworks and perspectives. And I started, at least at a certain time, I was very contemporary and knew most of the things that were being written. I was writing a lot of things at the time, and I got asked to start working with a couple of leaders in a large organization, some senior leaders, and I brought that information and that knowledge to bear, and it was very useful. It had an impact, but I got asked a lot of questions that I knew I didn't have answers to. Most of the questions were hugely practical questions, and the frameworks and the perspectives didn't match up all that well, and I didn't feel like a fraud, but I felt like I wasn't as expert as I wanted to be. And so I started a new research program where when I was studying leaders, I asked a different question. And the question that I simply asked was, what do they do that you and I don't do, the exceptional leaders? And that started all the long pathway and the journey that we now call admired leadership. And that was that was more than 3 decades ago, and I've been engaged in that research ever since. And so it's been a fun journey and process, but that's how it all started.
I know you've mentioned me offline. You had 2 big aha moments throughout your career that really shaped you. I'd love for you just to dive into these, and then we can segue from there.
I'm not sure I have only 2. I've had a lot of aha moments. I'm not too smart. Every once in a while, something hits me, and I go, "How did I miss that?" Right? So the first one was, and I just described it just briefly to you. I mean, it was surprising to me that no one else asked that question. In other words, the paradigm of individual differences, which is what dominates the leadership literature, which is that people are really different, granted, that other people that you are going to engage in as a leader are very different than you. So you got to know yourself first. You got to understand yourself. And then your job is to understand the differences that other people bring to bear. And then you need to adapt and flex on those differences. And so that's the idea that leadership is highly situational, highly contingent. And so it's very psychologically based, if you will. And by the way, really valuable. There's no one that gets to be a better leader without understanding themselves and understanding the differences that they have. But the big aha was when I would bring that information, those classification schemes, those diagnostics, when I would operate from the advice and practical wisdom of that idea or that approach, I wasn't making people very, very much better. They really weren't changing, and I wasn't very powerful in the advice and the counsel that I could give people. So my first big aha was when I started asking the question and studying, and when, first of all, I had to find fabulous leaders. And so I had to define what fabulous looked like. And one aha was a really kind of a smaller aha, but a big one for me in terms of its long-term impact was that followership is equal as results. We all define leadership as being able to get things done and producing results, whether those be macro results in terms of earnings and market share and things of that nature, or smaller micro results, which are really simply just being effective with people and the like. So results really matter, and in our culture in particular, we almost define leadership as synonymous with results. But the idea of actually having followership, that people respect you and want to be around you, want to follow you from place to place, willing to do anything you ask of them because they believe in you and they trust and respect you. And in particular, they believe there's a reciprocal relationship of loyalty that exists, that you would do anything for them. And so therefore they reciprocate with that. That followership piece is a really big deal. And so there's a lot of results leaders that don't have it at all. And as a result, don't get nearly as much done as they could. And so I started looking, and one big aha, again, small aha, but long-term big aha was let's define leadership not just as results, but as having an important part of followership also. So let's look for both of those qualities when you define great leaders. And then I started asking this question: what do those kinds of leaders that actually have results and followership, who were mostly admired by the people around them, what do they do that other people don't do on an everyday basis? How do they make decisions? How do they give feedback? How do they build relationships? What are some of the things they do stylistically? What makes them credible? And so when I started asking that question, I was shocked that question doesn't really exist from a research program. And so I thought, well, geez, either I'm really wrong or I'm really right. What's going on? And so the aha was that I'm really right, that I started learning tremendous amounts of ideas that were really practical and powerful that I could coach and teach other people. And so that was aha. But then the really big aha was I found my first two admired leaders in a very large energy organization, all the way back in the middle 80s in Chicago, where I was working. I was a professor at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana. I had a particular CEO that I had a relationship with. He had found me through the literature and wanted to talk with me, and we built kind of a relationship, even though he was 20 plus years my senior. And so he gave me carte blanche to go in to study leaders. I went in and with the idea of looking for the leaders that had both results and followership. And that's where the admired word came from for us, because when I found these particular two leaders, when I talked to the people around them that knew them very well, both friends and family and colleagues and peers and even some customers, everybody used the admired word. I admire them for this. I admire the way they do that. I admire that. So I started using that label to describe them. And so when I found these first two admired leaders, I thought, wow, this is really, really fascinating, because I'm learning all kinds of things by trying to figure out what they do that other people don't do. But the big insight was I thought that there was a quality about both of them that I thought was an anomaly. I thought, okay, well, that just happens to be a coincidence. But now, fast forward 38 years later, I now know that this is a quality of leadership. And that is, when I first studied those two leaders, I found that they were not only admired in the workplace, but they were admired by their kids. They were admired by their spouse. They were admired by their friends. They were admired in their community. They were admired in the places they worship. They were admired every place they went. And that's because they learned to do some things all the time. That this idea of behaviors and routines that they were wedded and committed to were the things that helped create that aura of admiration in other people's eyes. So while they knew themselves and they adapted and flexed and were contingent in situations, they also did some things all the time. And the big aha was, you mean if you know how to give feedback to a 58-year-old, it really should work with an 8-year-old too. And if it doesn't, it's probably not all that effective with the 58-year-old. And so the idea that this is the whole leader, that when you teach somebody and you understand, you actually have leadership wisdom around something, say like of giving feedback, it works in every aspect of your life. And the best leaders do it in every aspect of their life. Again, they may do it differently. Obviously, when you make decisions in a strategic setting in an organization, it's not the same as making a decision for where the family's going on vacation at holiday next year. But actually, the process is not all that dissimilar. Just some of the data and maybe the way you go about it and enact it is. And so when you're really good at leadership, you do the things that you believe in everywhere. And that was a big aha. I mean, the idea that, that I can find behaviors and routines and they make you a better parent, they make you a better spouse, they make you a better friend and a better team leader and better with the person that you report to and better with your clients and customers. Like that was such a mind-blowing thing to me that we could then help and figure out we had to approach the entire wholeness of a leader and a person. That was just the biggest aha. It just floored me. In fact, 38 years later, it still floors me. I'm still like, wow, like that's so profound and insightful and so true in my experience since then. I mean, listen, excellence doesn't get turned on and turned off. I mean, you've never met anyone that runs fast and then one day wakes up and runs slow. You've never met anybody that's really smart and one day is really dumb, right? People who are really good at something don't turn it off. Well, doesn't it make sense then that leaders that really have an insight as to how to do something that's a little more effective than anyone else, how to build a relationship, say with clients, that they would actually bring that same idea to their marriage and that same idea to their friends and build the relationship with their friends and the same idea in other spheres. Because once you really have an insight and a practice that works, you don't turn it off. It becomes a part of who you are. That's just, to me, gosh, how does everybody else miss that? I'm glad they missed that, because that's given me a great livelihood. But how do they miss that? I don't know.
Yeah, Randall, when I took your course, I think that was the biggest aha for me is just this wholeness that you talk about. How I operate in the business world is the exact same from family dynamic relationships as well. That's what I absolutely loved. Any idea why other people weren't asking those questions?
They still don't ask those questions, Sean. I mean, so all these decades later that I've been doing this, listen, I think the real reason is the other paradigm's too strong. It's too seductive. We try to understand why. We human beings are why people. Why do people do things? Like, let's figure out, what makes you tick and you talk, right? And so we like the theories and the explanations as to why things occur. What we miss is that understanding why doesn't necessarily make you better, that you still need tools in order to act. And but the other paradigm, the individual differences paradigm, which is so predominant, every university, every corporate HR department across the world, by the way, subscribes to that viewpoint as the primary way to think about leadership and about being effective as a leader. It's so powerful and so seductive that it shuts down the conversation or the way to look at other leadership from another angle. People tell me all the time, well, if you're looking for commonality around the best leaders, you're not going to find anything. Well, I can tell you, and you now know just by looking at the course, I mean, we know hundreds of routines and behaviors that are not well known, many of them unknown, right? That all the best leaders subscribe to and use, that in fact, they've never met each other. They're from different countries, they're different generations and the like, and they all do some of the same stuff. And, most of the academics that I'm still in contact with will say, well, if you find universals, they're self-evident. They're walking the talk and keeping your promises and showing up in a crisis and admitting your mistakes are the things that we've always known. We've known them for decades, and there's nothing powerful about them other than as reminders. And my response is, well, you've been eating canned vegetables all your life. It's time for you to have some fresh vegetables. If you ask a different question, you find some really insightful things and behaviors and routines that are in fact universal, timeless, contextually free in the sense that they operate in almost all contexts, that they are somewhat insightful, profound, but immensely actionable. And here's the beautiful part: when you understand a real routine of behavior that meets those criteria, you should be able to explain it in about 3 or 4 minutes. And I can explain any of the behaviors in 3 or 4 minutes. It might take you a little bit longer to get examples and other things in your head to really bring it alive for you. But the wisdom is brought to a really small point where we can simply articulate it very quickly. So I think it's that the other paradigm is just so darn strong and seductive. Even in our own team, people like to ask psychological questions, individual difference questions, because they're curious, and they should be. So I'll describe a behavior, and then somebody will say, do you think that different generations deal with that behavior differently? And I'm going, okay, you just entered the dark side, right? You went to the other side, and by the way, the other side's really important. But can we just stay on this side for a little while and talk about the commonness and universality of excellence and leadership excellence, rather than moving toward differences all the time? And people are well trained to do the opposite. And so I think the other paradigm is just so strong, and it's going to continue to be strong.
How do you run into the problem then? And this is around talent acquisition and talent development, bringing new people into the organization that are willing to look at things from a different prism.
Yeah, well, to a degree, I mean, I'll give you a little inside baseball, because I wind up having to insult people when I bring them into our organization. And the reason I do is because I have to shake them up, and because I have to know that they're willing to want to learn a wholly new way. So the majority of people that join our organization are very, somewhat senior people. They've been doing either coaching or advising work for quite a long time in many cases. And I'll sit down with them, and I'll like, their aptitude. I'll like their approach. I'll like their general style. I like everything about them. But now I have to convince them they don't know anything, which is not a fun thing, because it's not just from a standpoint of hubris. It's a standpoint of, if I don't convince them that they don't have the power they need to have, then there's no reason for them to be in our organization. So what I typically do is I'll say to a prospective coach, all right, so decision making, pretty powerful stuff, right? Is you don't know anybody that's a great leader that isn't also a great decision maker, and it's central to being considered a leader of prowess. Would you agree with me? And they of course agree. And I say, okay, so I have an assignment for you. I have a CEO that I'm going to give you as a coachee, and they're by the way, they're really talented. This is their 4th or 5th run at the CEO thing. They've made some fabulous decisions, but they want to be world class. They want to improve their decision making. So in the process that I'm going to sit you with them, and I'm going to ask you to make them better decision makers. So give me an outline of what some of the conversations and some of the topics, as well as some of the advice and counsel that you're going to give them. And please, before you answer me, don't be giving me some rational model of decision making, or telling me the 3 heuristics or the 3 biases. Don't tell me confirmation bias. They by the way, they know that one. Okay. And so they've been to all the great executive education around the country. And so tell me something that you're going to tell them that they don't know, that's going to propel them forward as decision makers. And they can't answer me. And there's a reason, because they don't have that level of practical wisdom in their head. And now, okay, I can say, okay, so now you and I can admit that deep down, right, you know lots about decision making, but you don't know anything powerful about decision making that can make people better. Would you agree with me? And they reluctantly go, in most cases, yeah, okay, you've made your point, you've embarrassed me. Like, what's your point? I go, how about if we spend the rest of your career and I show you those things, and then you start teaching other people, right? And that's how we get there. And it's not all that, initially it was fun, but it's not fun anymore. Okay. It's a little bit painful, in fact, and some people bristle at that conversation, and they get annoyed at themselves. I've even had some people go away upset after that conversation, and then come back to me and say, okay, I admit it now, right? All right, I don't have anything powerfully practical to teach people about decision making. So, what do you know that I don't know? And again, it's not about me. I'm not any smarter than anybody else, but we've been uncovering this stuff for years, and I could literally spend 2 years in an advising capacity with any given leader just on decision making, never discuss anything else, and never processing their own insights. So that idea of processing people from a coaching standpoint is really inexpert, in my opinion. The idea that all the wisdom exists in their head, and that's where I'm going to try to find it, and how do you go about making decisions, and what do you think about here, and anyway, that's useful to a degree, but it's not as powerful as people think. I mean, the best leaders in the world, if they're coming to you for advice and counsel, that they want some practical wisdom, and if you can't produce it, then they're not all that interested in the conversation. And by the way, if you went to a tennis professional to be a better tennis player, and they started asking you and only like, well, what do you think about tennis? How do you play tennis, right? And they never had any advice for how to improve your backhand or your forehand, or how to show you to serve, or where your feet were, because they didn't have any insight. You would say, well, they're not a very good tennis professional. I think that's true of the majority of people that talk about leadership. I don't know how you can be that proud of yourself and that good unless you know some really deep practical things about the advice and counsel you give other people.
Have you improved in terms of spotting that, the people who are willing to say, what do you know that I don't know? Can you tap into that earlier to understand if this person is someone who can develop quickly within an organization?
No, the answer is no. But now, because of the digital course, because of Admired Leadership Digital, we're having people come to us and say, this stuff is amazing, right? How do I learn more of it? And how do I become associated with that kind of programmatic research as well as advising? And so it's helping us a little bit. Some people are finding us now that are interested. That doesn't mean they have the right aptitude or style or things that could do this for a living like so many of the people in our firm do. But at least that helps a little. But no, we've not been great at it, to be 100% honest. Like anything else, if you go look at some of the largest consulting firms in the world, they will tell you that they probably get and have deep interviews and go deep with 50, 60, 70 people before they find one that they think is capable of doing the deal. And we certainly would fall into that same category. It's a volume game for us and has been, but we'll see. This is new for us, this Admired Leadership Digital. So we'll see if it produces and attracts some new people that kind of screen themselves for us a little bit, but that's where we are.
Well, you're someone, from my understanding, in terms of seeing things differently than others and having paradigm type shifts. So I'm wondering, even in terms of vetting out that aptitude within people, are there certain things that you've uncovered that you find these people tend to work out best within your organization?
Yeah, I don't know, Sean. Nothing that comes right to mind. And by the way, I'm no paradigm. I had one big insight around asking a different question, which I think is just a hugely paragraph. I haven't been all that insightful since then, just so that you know. And so, I'm no thought leader, at least not in my view. So, but yeah, there's nothing in particular that comes right to mind to that question.
Yeah, Randall, ever since my athletic career, I mean, this has been a decade plus, I've tried to study the best leaders, people who I admire, people from a distance, and your course was the best leadership course I've ever taken, bar none. So I think your paradigm shifting is more apparent to others, maybe. But we can move on from that. But I do appreciate what you've done.
We'll send you that check later, Sean.
Yeah, right. No. I'm not incentivized at all here. It's truly something that I took a great deal away from.
Nothing pleases me more. And listen, it was a big struggle to ever produce this thing and put it out. And I was against it for decades. And most days I wake up and I'm really glad that it exists. And I'm really pleased that you found so much value, and a lot of other people are too. So that makes me very happy.
So I'd even love to dive into behaviors just a bit more and understanding the process, the research process around uncovering one of these behaviors. What does that look like in a little bit more depth?
So first we go about trying to understand if somebody is potentially admired. So are they an admired leader? Do they have a track record of extraordinary results? By what objective measure can we make sense of that? And then do they have the level of followership that we would say constitutes an unusual level of people trusting and respecting them and the like? And so first we have to identify somebody worthy of study. Now that's gotten a lot easier because the literature and the general media helps identify people, and there's lots of data around people. It wasn't as easy when I first started doing all of this. And we have a couple of other shortcuts now that we can use to identify admired leaders. So now you find somebody that at best at best they're admired leader. At worst, they're either a results-based leader and lack followership at an extraordinary level, or they're a followership leader and lack results at an extraordinary level. So they're somebody worth studying. So that's where we start. The next is we treat them as a case study, a case study of one, where we're trying to now collect data about who they are and what they are. And so by that, I mean, we're looking at any interviews that they've ever given, anything that's been written about them. And some of those things can pop up in, some agent kinds of documents and journals and magazines and the like. And then we're looking for artifacts, speeches, outlines, performance reviews, emails, whatever artifacts we can get our hands on. And then we're also, we're trying to, if we can, interview people that know them very well. If we get total permission, we'll interview everybody around them, including friends and family, which are usually very insightful, by the way, the people that get a chance to see them the best and the most often, including their own leaders. And then we'll interview them. Although you'll be surprised at how few of the best leaders know exactly what they do. Just like great ball players, great athletes, they oftentimes don't know what makes them so good, what they actually do. If we can, we'll actually observe them in different settings. And so that's wonderful. So every leader we study, we have either a big file or a small file, depending on what kind of access we can get. And whether we're able to study them more rigorously or from a distance. And from that, we're really trying to discern two things. Number one, what do they do as leaders every day? What's their process? What are things that they're engaged in? What kind of style do they have? Who are they as leaders? I'm not interested who they are as historical people, demographically, third born. I couldn't care less, any of that. I just want to know what they do. And then the next thing, of course, we're looking at is what do they do differently that other people don't do? And that's what we're really focused on. In fact, those are the kinds of questions we're asking of all the people that surround them. So I'll ask people, a friend or a family member or a colleague, what do they do that you've not seen other people do? What are the kinds of ways that they motivate people? How do they make that change? What are some of the steps they took that you don't think are that common? Is there something they believe that you don't think other people believe? Have you seen them coach more junior people to success? What do they do every day? How have they given that feedback and so forth? So that process. So now you've got a case of one person. And then what happens, of course, is you can go backwards and look at all those individual leaders and then start to look for patterns. And the patterns aren't always obvious. And once you see them, they smack you in the head. But until you see them, they're really blind. I just did this last weekend. I found a routine. Now it tends to be this routine tended to be situated, not universal, not what we would consider something that would be something we would coach on, because it doesn't apply in all contexts, but it actually solves a particular problem. So it becomes advice, really good advice, powerful advice for us. So you find this routine, and now that I found it, I found just by going through some of our data, I found probably 30, 40 different examples of it. And prior to seeing the pattern, I couldn't see it at all. I didn't know what those examples were. Those were just words on a piece of paper telling me something that other people did. And so that's how it works. And then once we have a behavior routine that we think really matters, that there's a real pattern, we'll then go really deep in the data and say, can we find dozens of examples and see it in other of the cases that we have. We have tens of thousands of cases and over 15,000 leaders that we've studied. And in the process of that, then once we find that pattern, now I have to be able to put it into and articulate it in a way that makes sense instantly to somebody else, so that it has instant face validity. Because I'm not making a causal claim in our grounded theory approach to studying admired leaders. What I'm making is a claim of empirical pattern. That is, this is what the best leaders do. The best leaders do this. Maybe you should think about emulating that, but that's your call. I'm not making the claim that if you do this, then you'll become admired. That if you do this, you'll be more effective. What I'll say is, if I study leaders who are absolutely exceptional at building relationships, here's something that many of them do that other people don't do. And if on the face of that, you find that powerful, worth emulating, worth doing yourself, then I think it's worth me sharing it with you, right? And that's our approach to this entire piece. Now, that upsets a lot of academics and empirical kind of scientists, because they only think in causal relationships and correlations, and I'm totally uninterested, because my experience has been like those things are far and few between, and we can spend an entire lifetime only focusing on something really, really small that has no practical value forever. And so even when we find one of those causal relationships, people generally don't believe it or do it in any kind of consistent way, even across the whole culture. And so my view is, no, I just want to find the patterns of what the best leaders do and share that what those best leaders do with other people, and then put that in my own life and hopefully impact other people's lives with it. And so that's the whole process of what we do.
You mentioned that new routine. I feel like, could you dive into that just briefly? Because I feel like that would really add some clarity.
It's not developed enough. I don't even know how to articulate it very, very well, right? I mean, I'll share it with you, but I'm gonna wreck the whole process here, because it just isn't ready for prime time, right? But the inkling of it is this notion of debt in relationships. So when we're in a relationship, we want, the best relationships are equal. The best relationships are mutually influential. They're highly reciprocal. Now that's an attainment we're trying to get. We don't all get there with most of our relationships, but most people that study relationships and engage in relationships would say the best, authentic, rich relationships are ones where if I ask the question, who benefits most from this relationship, both parties would say, I do, it's me, right? I mean, because there's a reciprocal exchange of value in the relationship. So the idea of debt, that one individual inside a relationship owes the other a debt, creates an imbalance, creates a discomfort. So if all of a sudden, Sean, you and I know each other, but not very well, if all of a sudden I did you a big favor, I did this massive favor for you, and you were moving from one house to another house in your community, and I was in town, and I said, I'll show up and I'll help you move. You go like, Randall, I really don't even know you. And now I come and I help you move dirty boxes all day long, get sweaty and, lift things and even hurt my back and all those things. Now you feel indebted to me. Now the people that study things like cognitive dissonance will say, well, that's a good thing for your relationship because, Sean, you're going to feel more committed to Randall. And I would say, well, I don't doubt that, but that's not the point here, is that the debt actually creates a discomfort and an imbalance in that relationship that is not mutual and reciprocal. And it's a problem now in that relationship because it creates an awkwardness. And you'll feel like, first of all, you don't really know me, so why did I do that? So there must be some intention. I have some motive. I have something that, maybe even inimical going on here, right? And so you might avoid me, or you might even treat me not closer, but even further away, because I've created this discomfort by doing something extreme, like in this case, a favor that I shouldn't have done that early in the relationship. Same thing's true in a really well-developed relationship, by the way. If all of a sudden we're in a really well-developed relationship and we go on vacation and I pay for it all, right? It's my treat. Well, hold on. We've been peers. We've been colleagues. Why would you pay for me, right? It creates like that. That's insulting. That's right. And so the behavior that I started finding, and again, it's not ready for prime time, is this notion that what happens if I actually, before I do you a favor, I actually ask you for a favor. So imagine, Sean, I say to you, listen, I'm out of shape and I need some exercise. And I've been looking to exercise and really, really have a day where I do nothing but sweat and really pound it. I would love to come over and help you, right? Move boxes all day. And I know like that's, a little early in our relationship for me to offer that, but you'd be doing me a big favor. You'd be doing me a great service if you would let me do that. So do me this favor and let me come over and help. And what that does is it reduces the level of debt. It reduces the level of imbalance. Well, what I started to find early on now, and again, it's not ready, I'll say it one more time, it's not ready for prime time, is that there's lots of examples of giving and doing a favor or asking for a favor, okay, as a way of giving a favor to keep that balance in a relationship. Now, that's a very situated problem. Most of us aren't having issues with debt and imbalance in relationships. But it's not unusual totally unusual for early in a relationship or later in a relationship where all of a sudden we want to do something extreme for somebody because it lends itself to that right now. And we're good people and the like. And so this is the way an admired leader would probably go about doing it. They wouldn't just simply do the favor and give you, right, the case of wine in their cellar to say, congratulations, right? They'd say, my cellar is just absolutely packed and I want to break out and clear out some inventory and so I can buy some new wine. So you're doing me a favor if you'll accept my gift of a couple of cases of great wine because it's something that helps me. And so they'll ask for a favor in order to give a favor. Now, how powerful is that? Again, it's very situated. It's not like an admired leadership behavior that we would go out and coach and advise about, but it's the inkling to something. And at some point, I'll be able to articulate that in a much more powerful way. And I'll be able to then bring it as advice to people who are like, it's almost like it's the ninja version of relationships. But if you're really good at relationships, that those kinds of nuances, those kinds of things right on the edge of what it really means to create. I mean, details really matter. All of a sudden, that will be meaningful to you. It won't be something that will ever see an admired leadership course because it's very much about a particular problem in a relationship rather than relationships in general. But it's that kind of next order understanding that people who are already have achieved mastery go, that's really interesting. Let me play with that. And that's one of those.
I love that. I love playing at the margins there. So that's an excellent example. And Randall, if you're clearing out the cellar, please feel free to send it down here to South Florida. So big advocate of wine.
I got you.
And I actually really like that you dove into that. So I appreciate it because it dehumanizes. I almost thought for a second here, you have decades and decades of experience that you come across something and you've got it perfectly distilled down. So that was fantastic. This has me thinking a lot around mentorship. And I've even found this in my own life that when someone's been a great mentor for me, I just feel indebted that I could never bring them the amount that they've brought me. How should I be thinking through that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the reciprocal exchange in a mentor relationship is for you to take people seriously, for you to be highly thankful, and for you to actually use the advice and wisdom that you get on purpose, and to make sure that people know about the examples of it. They need to realize that they're having the influence. People want to know that they've had the influence on you that they hope that they're having. So I always like the story one of my colleagues told me at one point. They were running for an airplane, not in the old days, but not that long ago. And so they came to the counter at the check-in, and they were really close, and they didn't have bags, so they got their ticket and so forth, and they went up, and the agent at the check-in had said to them, you might be able to make it. Please hurry. Here's how you can get there a little faster, and so forth and so on. And so that person went, got through security, made it to their gate just before they closed the door, got on the plane and made the plane. Well, a couple of weeks later, they were going through the same airport, and they went up to the gate agent and they said, by the way, thank you so much. I made the plane that day. And she remembered, and she said, thank you so much for telling me. I have so many people that have the experience, but I never know whether they make it or not. I never know whether they actually make it on the plane. And it's so dissatisfying because I never know. And so thank you for taking the time and the energy to tell me that you made the plane. That's really what mentors want. Did you make the plane? Did what I say work? Did it have influence? And 5 years later, did something I say mean something to you? That's the big reward for the mentor. That's how you reciprocate with a mentor, is you make sure that their influence is known, not falsely, by the way. Not everything they say and do is going to have an impact, but when it does, make sure that you tell them, and that's the biggest reward for them as mentors.
How important is storytelling in all this? You tell these great stories here today on the show and throughout the course, and they really resonate, and then I tend to remember them so much more. Is that one of the key things great leaders do?
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything about storytelling per se. I think it's more about the human condition than it is about leadership. I think we remember things, we store things. There's lots of data that suggests that episodes and stories, are the way that we recall and retain information, and we can make sense of random information by putting it into story kinds of frames and frameworks. And so I think stories matter. I've never seen anything in particular. I could show you not our data, but other people's data around how better storytellers tell stories better. But I've not seen anything pervasive around admired leaders anyway, about that they tell stories at this particular time or they tell stories in this particular way. But I agree with you. I think the ability to bring ideas alive and have them remembered falls on one of two things, either stories or models. And that's how we learn. We learn through stories and we learn through models. Now, I find models even more interesting from a leadership standpoint. But stories are really, really powerful. I like to tell them, and I think every other human being likes to tell them. We have whole cultures that are grounded in storytelling, ours included. And so stories are just ubiquitous to the human condition, but nothing that I've been able to see so far anyway around how stories operate differently for the best leaders, other than they tell them like everyone else and use them powerfully.
Randall, I want to circle back to something we were bringing up at the start of the show, and that's around knowing yourself. And I feel like if you don't know yourself, you don't know your values, you're really operating on a weak foundation. So I'm wondering for you, someone who's much more experienced, has been in this game way longer, how long have you known yourself? And then how does that change over time?
So there's a lot of different ways to come to that question, and I'm a poor one to ask because I am not wedded to that paradigm. But understand. So first of all, I think there's lots of different dimensions and qualities you can learn about yourself. So you should know some of your predispositions and some of the things that are baked deep in your DNA that you've probably inherited from your family, and biologically that you carry with you. And so they're definitely those things. And I think for you not to know them means that you're kind of operating at a deficit. But I think there's other things to know about yourself, or like in terms of your values, that are evolving all the time. There are things to know about the things that you like and dislike, the things that bother you and don't bother you. Those things really matter too. And so, but those are much more ephemeral. They're moving all the time and changing to some degree. Now, maybe values aren't, they're fairly stable, but things like what brings you joy or pleasure can change, quite drastically as you age and the like. What's important to you, what really matters, and the like. So I think it's important to know, but there's a lot of things that other people can bring to you that all of a sudden shake you up. Like I remember when I first had the epiphany, and another aha for me, that success in life is really about how many people you matter to. Because I always thought success in life was about having influence. And that's a particular kind of influence. But, the idea that, in what relationships, like who really matters, who do you really matter to, and who really matters to you? And that at the end of your life, that you're going to judge yourself, because I've interviewed lots of people at the end of their lives, by the way, and that you're going to judge yourself not by, what strategies, what decisions, but by the quality of the relationships that you still have where you matter to those people. And I don't mean in terms of just you had influence on them. Again, that's how I always saw it before. But that right now, this moment, you're important to those people because of who you are and what you are and how you engage them. And when I had that idea around that's what success is, it changed a lot of things for me. Now that's all of a sudden, that's something I've been able to keep for ever since I decided that really is what success is. By the way, I'm not making that argument to other people. That's how I'm defining success. I hope you find it compelling, but that's up to you. But that's about knowing myself. Now that I know that, and I've decided that that's what I'm committed to, no surprise, I'm trying to matter to more people. Okay. And so there's a lot of things about knowing yourself that also happen in the experience of life, where you say, you know what, I know that this matters or this is important to me, and I'm now going to commit to it. That's a different kind of knowing. And so I think they go both hand in hand. The knowing of who you are psychologically and respecting that knowledge, how you get angry, why do you react to certain things? Why is it that you find certain things so bothersome? What about your personality makes it so that you don't like large parties and groups? You prefer to find your energy from a book and from yourself. Those are things that are about your psychology, and I want you to know them and respect them. But I also want you to understand that a part of knowing is about creating yourself through experience and then committing to things, just like you would commit to a relationship. And in that process, that commitment requires you to think about it deeply and then to act on it. And that's a different way of knowing yourself. And I think both sides really matter.
No, that's really helpful. You mentioned you've interviewed a lot of people at the end of their lives. What particular stage in life of the people that you've interviewed do you think has been most insightful for you?
I can tell you where it hasn't been insightful, and that is when people are first nascent and inexperienced and just becoming leaders for the first time. They don't know what they don't know in a really big way. And so I haven't been able to find a lot of value in that. Now, that doesn't mean there's not value there, but I haven't been able to find it. And obviously, the more experience people have, sometimes experience shuts down things, stops you from seeing things, requires you to make assumptions. But in the leadership world, I find that wisdom and experience comes together. And so at least in my personal experience, I'm more likely to find insight with people that are either right in the throes of an issue or that have seen that issue many, many times. And when you've seen something many, many times, you start to see your own patterns as to what works and what doesn't work, or what is important and isn't important. And so when I can find somebody later in their careers or after their careers that are still cerebrally connected to their work, to those ideas, and then I can ask them for their insights, I can find sometimes much more insightful things. But again, it's a pretty big mix. I mean, I'll learn from anybody from anywhere, and if they say something valuable, I couldn't care less where they are in their life's journey. If they do something valuable and I can see it, then great. But it's not. We don't just study senior leaders, and I'm not only focused on people that are after their careers. I really like people that are in the throes of a problem, that are making that particular kind of decision or decision set, or that are dealing with problematic parenting. Most ubiquitous leadership act in the world. Listen, teenagers. Wow, no simple task. I love to be understand how people are dealing with teenagers, because it brings out the best and worst in them. But in terms of their actions, they're trying everything in their power to have influence, and I'm going to learn some really interesting stuff. And most people that have teenagers are still fairly young, right, in their careers and their lives. So there's all kinds of things, all kinds of places to find wisdom.
Talking about finding wisdom, behind you there appears to be a large bookshelf. Are there any books that you've enjoyed throughout the years you tend to go back to?
Yeah, there's gosh, you got another show for me to go through all the books. I mean, there's so many books that have been impactful. I'll give you one or two that are not as well known. I'm really a big fan of a book called Management of the Absurd, 1990s, like 6 or so. It's a really unknown book, really, really smart. The author, and I'll mess up his name, so I'm not great on names. I'm about the ideas, not the names. The author makes in one of the small, really small book, by the way, makes a distinction between problems and dilemmas and the difference between the two, and that was really insightful to me when I read it. That's a really great book. A guy named Sample, used to be the president at USC, wrote a book in like 2002 called A Contrarian's Guide to Leadership. Another really unknown book. Really good. I mean, really, really special book. Has a chapter in there on thinking gray. I love that chapter. I make everybody who I come in contact with read that chapter, because it's all about thinking gray, but it's also about thinking black and white. You got to balance both of those things. And so can't make decisions unless you start putting them in blacks and whites, but thinking gray really matters. And so there's books like that. I'm a contrarian generally, and so I like those things that are not as well known. But if you think about really well known books, or that are pretty popular books, again, I'm not highbrow, so if somebody says something insightful or that has a bunch of wisdom in it, I don't care if it's written in a sophomoric way or it's very popular or not. So I like The Talent Code. I think that's a really insightful book. I wish it was written a little differently and the like, but that book, I think it's Daniel Coyle, right? I always say Coyle. That's a really smart book. I like that book. I could give you 20 others like that. But so I'm always looking for those things like that. There's just so much to read and so much to go through. And people think people aren't reading as much. Well, people are writing a lot, I can tell you that. And so, my Amazon account is way up there every month. I'm just trying to stay abreast of everything that's going on out there. But there's lots of great things to read.
Yeah, we can dive into some more of those over a nice bottle of wine. I would love the one contrarian biography.
A contrarian biography. Read the most recent Bruce Springsteen biography. Fascinating that somebody at his level of success and stardom could have that much self-doubt and that much paranoia about his own skills, of the way that he prepares and practices and like. Love that. Love. No, not a lot of deep wisdom in that book, but a lot of confirming wisdom in that book, and love that that biography.
Awesome. I almost picked that up the other day. I didn't, so now I'm regretting that. We'll have to.
Yeah,
you mentioned self-doubt. I have to assume the majority of the leaders you work with, many responsible for some of the largest deals in Wall Street, they're almost on the other spectrum, right? Where they almost have too much self-belief.
Sometimes, it can be a real problem. Listen, the number one thing that gets in everybody's way is ego. Ryan Holiday, ego is the enemy. A perfect title. Ego is definitely the enemy, and it closes down a lot of things. It makes it so that people feel like they own things instead of we're stewards of things. They don't reach and seek information. When you become senior in an organization, everything is filtered for you. You get very small pieces of truth. And so if you're not out there pushing against that and trying to find the more candid and unbridled views of things, and you're gonna wind up operating from limited data, and much of it false. And so hubris and ego and vanity, they're a big deal. Profile, that's a really big deal with some of the best leaders. The best leaders, the most admired leaders, eschew profile. They want nothing to do with being well known or being on. They don't want their face on a coin at all. They look at profile as totally the enemy. Profile makes you a target, makes you a target for scrutiny and peer jealousy. It makes you a target for media investigation. It makes you targets for lawsuits. Profile makes you nothing but makes you feel good about yourself, and then it gets you in trouble, right? So there's one that's really contrarian. The best leaders I've been around, I've actually tried to, either they already have low profile or I try to reduce their profile on purpose. I've been successful in some cases and the like, and they thank me for it later. I had a leader once say to me, "You're only famous, truly famous, when somebody who's crazy thinks they're you." And there's no upside to that. And I buy that. I love that line, right? For that exact reason. And so profile, vanity, ego, those are all things that get in people's way. They shut down conversations. I can't tell you how many organizations I've gone into where I've met the most senior leaders or leader, and I walk into their office and it's a shrine. You literally feel like you should genuflect when you walk in. And my first conversation with them is, now let me get this straight. Is leadership about you or is it about the other people? Should I feel comfortable? Should I want to be able to open up and find you approachable and to discuss anything I want inside your office? Or should I feel like as if in fact, you are the most amazing, spectacular human being that's ever walked the planet, and I should pretty much be cowed by you as soon as I walk in this office? Like, what are you trying to project here? Because they don't even recognize it. They don't even see. They're proud of themselves, and they should be, by the way. But I tell them, guess what? Take that to your home office, put it in your basement, have your dog come in and genuflect, right? But in your office, this needs to be about other people. Leadership is not about you, it's about them. And so let's create an environment that's about them. And so let's get rid of, right, all these, famous pictures and all these, these magazine and newspaper clippings and all this nonsense, right? And let's get a conference table and in a place where they can feel comfortable. I mean, so ego is a big deal, and hubris is a big deal, and that not just on Wall Street. I mean, I go lots of other places, and so it's a problem almost every place. It's easy when you get to a certain level where you feel self-important. And the object is to fight that. And sometimes as an advisor, my whole purpose, my whole role is to help people fight that and to see things more accurately and candidly. What's that old line? Angels fly because they operate lightly. They see themselves lightly. I think you have to see yourself I think you have to see your work as tremendously serious and important, and you have to see yourself as less so. And that's what great leaders do. And so that's a big issue. Now on Wall Street and those kinds of leaders, you'll find differences just like you find any place else.
Yeah.
The best leaders I've ever been around have been in hedge fund managers and private equity leaders and bank leaders, and some of the worst leaders I've ever been around have been in that same camp, right? They tend to be more extreme in that environment, but you can find some really good ones.
Yeah, and I don't want to limit your work to just that. You operate within sport, all across different leaders. Multiple times there, you mentioned the importance of about being the other people within your organization. This is something I'm just so fascinated with in developing and skilling up. Right, you want elite performance. What do you do differently within CRA that just helps those people once in the organization develop their talents quicker?
It's a series of conversations, and it's all about, I'm a big believer in emergent meaning, in dialogue. I believe that all the real powerful things happen in dialogue. They happen in conversation. And so it's about being purposeful around those conversations. It's about having a set of structured conversations. You don't know exactly what's going to get said or done. You have a general framework, but it's about, and so we design a set of conversations that last usually more than a quarter of time, weekly, where those conversations occur. And then we do clinics all the time where everybody pitches in and starts to ask certain questions about a given situation. If you find yourself in this situation or with this kind of an issue, like what advice, counsel would you bring to bear? Is there anything about admired leadership you bring to bear? How would we think about the problem? And so when you get a lot of other smart people that are really experienced talking about something, all of a sudden light bulbs go off and people get better really fast. Mm-hmm. So to me, that's one. The second one is models. When you have great models so that you're able to videotape, for example, record a great dialogue, a great group dialogue, and then I can watch that. And then I can say, well, what was really good in there? I mean, obviously you've held this up. I've held this up as a piece of excellence. How do I do it differently right now? Where is that excellence in there? The more models you can collect and create for other people, the better they get really fast. And so if you had a child, for example, and they wanted to learn how to ride a horse or throw a lacrosse ball, or to have a certain dance move, or learn a dismount off a jump in gymnastics, or whatever it is, you now have YouTube. Like you can take them right and you can see like 50 models. How cool is that from a learning standpoint? Well, the same thing's true almost every place else. Like if you're a firm that does proposals, scopes of work like ours does, or you have coaching conversations, there's no reason that you can't collect exemplars. And when you put exemplars in the hands of smart people, they're not just going to plagiarize them. They're going to look and find and say, how do I find myself in this thing? And they can get better really fast. So we're big on two things: conversations on the one side and structured conversations, and then models on the other side. And I think if you put those together, they're really powerful.
Yeah, I love those two very, very clear examples there. It's funny what's available now. I'm sure even on YouTube, you could find someone dismounting off of a horse into a dance move with a lacrosse stick. So it's pretty remarkable what we can find there. Yeah. I know you have a sports background. You played golf. So this is purely a selfish question. I'm always intrigued by this. We always hear about the person, they just have the it factor. Are you familiar with people being titled, they just have it?
Sure. Yeah.
Distill this down for me. What is this?
I always like the description of Paul Bear Bryant, the Alabama football coach. I don't know who said it, but somebody said we don't know what he has, but he has a lot of it, right? I think that's true, right? So when you want to distill down the it factor, there's lots of different things that people are honing into. But what I would tell you is the majority of people that have it from a leadership standpoint have executive presence or gravitas. And that's a behavioral thing that I can show you how to do it. Right now, you might take a lot of practice, and you're going to do it differently than somebody else will do it. But it's all about the way that you balance, right? This idea of markers or cues of status, and then markers or cues of being relationally attractive to other people. And when you're too far on one side or the other, which most of us are, we lose a sense of a blended balance, and so we don't have near the presence that other people have. Now, it also requires us to be cool under pressure, to articulate ourselves well. There's other things about presence that matters, but the it factor, at least in leadership, tends to be presence. And that is, we can break that down and make people better in presence without a whole lot of theory or framework and the like. And so that's fun. But to me, that's the it factor. Now, if you start talking about athletes that have the it factor, they make things that are really, really hard look really easy, because their skillfulness is at a different level, a different tier. And so when you watch somebody who's really, really athletically superior, what you're going to find is they do the most common things uncommonly. And as a result, it's very difficult for you and I to discern that stuff because they're making it look really easy. That to me is the it factor. And now I can't teach you how to do that athletically. I've never worked with athletes in that particular kind of way. I mean, maybe a little bit from a golfing standpoint, but that's really the thing that we talk about, and it's something we're compelled to try to understand better. But I'm really speaking it from as an outcome, right? Rather than the process to get to that spot. But you're really talking about people that are just, their deliberate practice has happened with such a degree of purpose and intention, and they've been able to acquire a level of skill so much more superior than everyone else, that now they have it. And the way we know they have it is they do these things and it looks seamless, it looks fluid, it looks effortless. And now we know they have it. And so, yeah, that's kind of cool. And it works. It certainly is true in golf. That's for sure also.
It has me thinking about a basketball example with James Harden, who's one of the best players in the league. And so they did all the data points around every athletic movement he does. And he was 100% average in every single thing he did, along with the rest of the NBA, except for one thing. And that was how quickly he could stop. And it was the top 99 percentile. And that example, I just thought was fantastic. So
really cool example. Really cool example. I love that.
Yeah. I know we're going to round it out here in a minute. I am wondering, though, you're such a high performer with what you've done multiple decades. Where do you find the most challenge with your work?
The most challenge. Well, listen, I have quite a few gatekeepers that are between me and working with the most senior leaders in industry. And oftentimes those gatekeepers will say, or ask me the question, where are you best? Now, I give them a wrong answer because I want the challenge. Because what I tell them I'm best at, which is also true, is I'm best at the people that think coaching, advising, and getting better as leaders is a bunch of horse shit, right? That it's total, this is just soft, touchy-feely stuff that doesn't really matter. People don't get that much better. Who you are is who you are. And the idea of actually having a coach and advisor is for other people that, probably, need a crutch, but they don't need that crutch. I love talking to people like that, because in an hour, I will totally change their mind, because what they know really matters to them, and they're really expert at whatever it is they know. And I'll have them articulate that for me really fast. But once we start talking about issues around leadership, and they realize that there's somebody else out there, in this case, me, that knows as much about leadership and about how to be effective as they know about what they know, they go, okay, now I want an advisor. Now I want a coach. So I find the most challenging situations, those where I have to turn people from no go, right? Not interested. In fact, it's more than not interested. I think, this is all nonsense. And I have to turn them quickly within one conversation to a point of saying, let's keep talking. I like this. This is not what I expected. That is both a challenge and something that I think is really fun. Most people would not find that fun, by the way. If I did that, if I gave those assignments to most of my colleagues, they would say, that is not fun. I don't enjoy those people at all. I love talking to those people because I find it a personal challenge to turn them. And so that's fun. That's fun and challenging for me. It's probably not what I'm best at, but I'm definitely good at it, and have proven that over a lot of years and so forth. And so have turned and made a lot of advocates out of people that couldn't have been more resistant to begin with. So that would probably be my first response, and probably one that I've been consistent for me for a long time.
Randall, have you ever seen the movie The Princess Bride?
Yes. Yeah.
So this reminds me of the scene, the sword fighting scene, where he goes, and then he flips it over and he goes, I'm not left-handed. He'd been sword fighting left-handed the entire time to his weakness. So glad you and Inigo Montoya share some similarities there.
There you go.
Two more quick ones here before we round out, get everyone connected with admired leadership. This might be one of those questions that just annoy you and piss you off, but we'll see. You mentioned you study over 15,000 leaders. I'm wondering, is there one leader who's just exemplified the most amount of these behaviors overall?
Yes, but not that you'd know. And so let me tell you about Dick Morgan. Dick Morgan was really, really special. He was actually an executive at Con Edison in Manhattan, the utility company. And we had the pleasure of studying him in the late 90s, early 2000s. And he was really just different. We learned more from him in that one case than probably we learned from any single leader. He was that special of a human being. And as a leader, I mean, he just was just unbelievable. And he in a utility company of all places, with a big union workforce and everything else. And he was so admired that he actually was asked to come out of retirement twice. And so he ran steam operations for Con Edison, which if you're around New York City, you realize is a very big deal. Almost all the hotels and big buildings operate and run through steam underneath the city. He ran steam operations, retired, and then early in his career, he had a influence over emergency management services, and so they were having problems at the time. And the CEO actually asked him to come back out of retirement and to run emergency services and to fix things with New York City and the politicians and everything else, which he came back and did. And so he was just exceptional. He just was somebody. Now, you would never know about Dick Morgan unless I told you, and that's true of the majority of the admired leaders that we've studied. They don't have the iconic status. If you were ever in Con Edison at that time period, and even probably now, you'd either heard of or knew Dick Morgan. I mean, he was just revered. He was a Muhammad Ali and Arnold Palmer level, persona. Okay. Now, the sad part about Dick Morgan was running emergency services in 2001, still, at the end of his career, 9/11 happened and he went straight to the towers and got all the Con Edison people out except himself. And so he perished in 9/11. And what a tragedy in so many ways, because the world was robbed of one of the great leaders that we'd ever been around and the like. And I was really honored because I was asked to put together, having studied him, his principles that were spoken at his eulogy. And by the way, 8,000 people attended his funeral. I'm not even sure, I could get 8 to show up to mine, but he had 8,000 people. That's how revered and admired he was. And he just was amazing. And I think about him all the time. I tell stories about him all the time. And by the way, I don't just tell stories because he perished and he was part of 9/11. I was telling stories like that the moment, soon after we studied him. I mean, he just was that special. Now, we've been around some other really special leaders, some of which you know, some of which you don't. Athletic coaches are the most easy to identify with and see. And we've been around some pretty special ones. And we've studied some really, really special ones that are special in particular ways that are really just extraordinary. And those names, but of all the leaders we've studied, Dick Morgan is probably Richard Morgan. And by the way, at the bottom of the memorial at World Trade today, you'll never see it. Okay, you can see it on the internet if you want. In the steam room, down at the very, very bottom, there's a very small plaque for Dick Morgan that Con Edison dedicated and quite a long time ago when the memorial was created. And I got a chance to go down and see it. I just needed to see it, and just really cool. So thanks for asking that. I wish I could give you, like 15 leaders that you knew instantly, and I would if you really needed me to. But I prefer not to, because then it's like, whoa, like puts them up to scrutiny and so forth. But he was really special.
No, thank you for sharing that. I love hearing the stories of ones we would have never heard before. So that was special. That was great. You shared that. Last one here. I am wondering if you could go throughout all of history and you could sit there and study and work alongside one leader throughout history, who would that be?
Oh gosh, there's so many of them. I mean, seriously, there's just so many of them. Probably the leader that you have in your head that is in your head, not a great leader, and didn't do things that you would consider to be worth emulating, that the opposite is true, is Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan was one amazing leader in so many ways. What he did to rally the different tribes, and the kinds of ways that he did war, and the way that he rewarded people, and how he acknowledged people. I mean, if I could go back and be protected, by the way, safe, like not killed instantly, and be around a leader to learn from, I mean, go read about Genghis Khan sometime by some of the scholars that actually write about him, and read some of the stories. And gosh, would I love the data around Genghis Khan. I mean, unbelievable, and how he changed the world. I mean, with some of the ideas that he generated, by the way. I could regale you over and over and over again about his creativity and his insight. But, contemporary currency came from Genghis Khan. Prisons and paroles came from Genghis Khan. So many of the modern institutional things that we think that we take for granted. Primary education in the U.S., where the idea of you get educated to a certain level, it wasn't the same thing, but that came from that Mongolian time period, that dynasty. They came from Genghis Khan. I mean, just so he would be it. Now that's a really strange answer. I realize that people go, so this guy you had on the podcast wants to go be with Genghis Khan. That's the lead. Go read about him. You have all the wrong stuff in your head about who Genghis Khan was. And so now, if I take Genghis Khan out of the soup, because he would be by far, above anything else. I mean, I'm a U.S. guy. I'm an American guy. I'm a guy that believes in U.S. history. If I had one other, it would probably be Meriwether Lewis. Lewis, despite the fact that he ended his life not in the highest regard and so forth, what he did during the expedition to find the passageway to the Northwest, and his leadership to be able to take 42 people across 2,000 miles and back without any revolt and mutiny, dissension and who he was. If you really get into him, that's somebody else I would really like to have had real conversation with, and stood side by side and learned, how did he know to do some of that stuff? Amazing. And I don't have a lot of the texture data that I have on more contemporary leaders. So I don't know for sure if I would learn a whole lot from him, but everything tells me that I would. So that would be the more, and that's not contemporary, but that would be the more recent leader.
Yeah, you tell a great story in one of the modules around Meriwether Lewis that I really enjoyed, because I'd not done any research or heard very much about him. Genghis Khan, surprisingly, this is not the first time he's come up in terms of being one of those leaders. And a great introduction to him is Jack Weatherford's book, Making of the Modern World.
The scholar. Weatherford's the scholar. But there's a lot of other works out there that can give you some more texture on Genghis Khan. What wonderful.
Yeah. Randall, this has been such a pleasure. The course is admiredleadership.com. I want to make sure we talk about it a little bit more. What can someone signing up for this course, what can they expect to receive out of it, in addition to everything you were so kind with over this last hour and a half?
So what Admired Leadership is, and the digital course is we've taken 10 modules of leadership. We could have put as many as 25, but we chose 10. feedback, inspiration, motivation, relationships, making great decisions, holding people accountable. We took 10 modules of leadership. We took 10 behaviors and routines. Think about a behavior as an action that we would engage in. A routine is usually either iterative actions or something that happens over time. And so we took 10 behaviors, routines in each module, and so 100 behaviors, routines themselves. And we cobbled it into a course that we think thematically makes sense. The cool part is no vertical learning there. You don't have to know one thing to know another thing. You could go any place, just simply spend the 10 minutes, all the videos that explain the behaviors are 10 minutes or less. Then there's outlines and examples and exercises and study questions in each one for all 100 of them. You could just spend time in just one behavior, and you could make a very big impact on your leadership. You change 5 or 6 things and really commit yourself to emulate 5 or 6 things, your entire leadership changes stylistically. And I have my favorite pieces in that work. The inspiration, motivation stuff is so different and so powerful. And it's who I want to be as a person, as a leader. And I was so happy to find that stuff. So, my leadership is a particular set of most of us want to be better leaders, but we don't know how. And so we read and we talk about it and we attend conferences, and admired leadership is how. It's the actual actions of great leaders and things that you and I can do tomorrow. And so it's the how, it's the tool in order to get better. And that's what it is.
Yeah, Randall, that's it. admiredleadership.com. It'll be linked up here in the show notes. And like I mentioned previously, I had no incentive here. I took this course and I had extremely high standards with what gets my attention and then what I learned the most from. And without a doubt, this leadership course was the best leadership course I've ever taken. And surprisingly enough, multiple people who've actually been guests on this podcast actually recommended it to me as well. So those are some of the most elite high performers on the planet here recommending it as well. So Randall Stutman, it's admiredleadership.com. I can't thank you enough for joining us here on What Got You There. This was a true pleasure.
My pleasure. And just recognize that the whole idea is just to get better. Like that's what we're supposed to be. And we're supposed to, most of us aren't as good as we need to be. We're a little too self-satisfied. We like who we are, which we should. We like the effects and the outcomes that we get, which we probably should also. But the object is, never to give up. Always, good enough is not good enough, and to get better. And that's what we put this together for people, and to have a bigger influence on more people being better leaders. And so, if anybody can get better through this, then we're happy. Thanks for having me. Pleasure. It's been great getting to know you, and I'll make sure you get that case of wine sometime shortly. And in the meantime, whatever I can do to help people be better leaders, I'm happy.
What got you there with Sean DeLaney? 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 What got you there with Sean DeLaney?